Thank you. All right, appreciate it. Day 2, afternoon, post-lunch of a conference. I appreciate you being here. I imagine you're just as tired as I am, and I appreciate your time and attention. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, and so I'm thrilled to get the chance to be with you here today in Iowa. All right, as was mentioned, my name is Ken Smith. I'm the Director of Learning and Development at Praetorian. We're an offensive security firm based in Austin, but we're really all over the place. I myself am from Cleveland, drove in on Thursday night, going to drive back this afternoon. My whole background, I won't dig into it, but my whole background is really in offensive security. I got my start in the military. I was with the Special Forces Group for a number of years doing signals intelligence, and it was kind of my last couple of years in the service there that this stuff really took off, and I found a passion. How I got into the learning side and in my current role is I have a huge passion for bringing folks into the industry, for training, for education. Spent a number of years at the University of Mount Union, just recently stepped out of that particular role, and really enjoy talking about both physical and cybersecurity, and so that's why we're here today. All right, before I dive in, how many folks in the room have participated in physical pen testing as an actor, as somebody actually going and doing the break-ins? All right, a handful. Awesome. Okay, how about on the other side? Anyone, any customers or potential customers on the inside purchasing those types of services? Okay, that's fine. I'm not, by the way, I'm not here to sell anything. We don't actually even do physical services. I just really like talking about it. I ask because the tail end of the talk here is going to be about how to be better as testers, but also as a potential vendor, what to look for, what questions to ask. You'll see it's very tempting to just kind of get into the cool factor of physical pen testing when there's really questions that need to be asked on both sides of the equation. And so that's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. So as you can imagine, physical pen testing shares a lot in common with network and application testing. It's a simulated attack and breach, except it happens in the real world as opposed to the cyberspace. In truth, physical pen testing is a bit of a misnomer. It's actually closer in purpose and execution to something like red teaming, as opposed to an application test or a network test, right? Those are very vulnerability enumeration driven, right? When you come out of a network pen test, you typically end up with, here's your vulnerabilities. They may be linked in a path, with the breach, but at the end of the day, it's the findings that you care about. Whereas with a red team or a physical pen test, it's more about the goal, right? And it's about, is the organization prepared for this type of breach, right? So I just want to kind of frame the conversation starting with that, right? Goals are very much going to vary by target and industry. Something as simple as, we just want you to get past the perimeter. Hey, we store our sensitive information in the basement, get there. There's particular controls. Hey, we've just put this new system into place, see if you can get past it. We want you to provoke a response, see if you can get security or law enforcement to react, right? That's what drives, or should drive at least, a physical pen test, right? It does, of course, come down to the idea of just playing the role of the criminal, so there's a lot of carryover, as you can imagine. In terms of paperwork, some of the same stuff here as with a normal app or network pen test. There's a statement of work, lists the targets, gives the expectations. There should be left and right boundaries for the testers, depending on what the customer is looking for. And we'll talk more about what that means a little bit later. Same with rules of engagement. We have to be very specific when it comes to things like rules of engagement with physical pen testing. The other thing that you need to get into this type of project is an authorization letter, right? This is lovingly referred to as the get out of jail free card. It should include the names of the testers, their contact information, usually a description or even a photo would be ideal. Most importantly, it should include the contact information for the client representatives who are paying to have the work done, so that when we get caught at 2 o'clock in the morning, they know who to call, right? The law enforcement security can call and get a hold of somebody. It should also be printed on the customer's letterhead. Right? A lot of the times you'll say, oh, give us the letter and then we'll keep it on record. Like, no, I want your letterhead so that whoever I hand it to knows it's coming from you, right? It's not really a security measure, but it's more of a warm fuzzy, right? These types of things, when you get caught, security is going to be pumped up, law enforcement might be pumped up. You want to de-escalate, and if they see something familiar on it, or oh, this is their letterhead, it calms things down a little bit better, right? There we go. All right, so that's pretty readable. Okay, so we organize the different TTPs, the tactics, tools, techniques, procedures into different areas. really increasing of not necessarily complexity, but maybe of usual usefulness. Social engineering, right, just lying to get where you want to go. Right? In person, obviously, this is the physical world. Tailgating, so that's just, hey, hold the door, that is probably the single most useful technique when it comes to this particular area. Things like badge replication, so not actually cloning the badge, but going online, finding somebody who's got a badge, and then buying a $20 badge printer on Amazon and a little bit of nasty Photoshop skills and printing it out so it looks real, right? That's replication. Getting a little more complex would be bypass operations. So this is as simple as pulling on door handles, jumping fences, or something that we call creative entry, which is just pulling on door handles, but where you might not expect doors to be, and we'll revisit that a little bit later in the presentation. And then on the kind of the far end of the complexity spectrum would be the tool facilitated operations. So this is door shimming, lock picking, under the door tools, badge cloning, so you're actually electronically cloning the badge and making it useful. I will say that, and a point that I'll make later is it's very important to have these things on complete and comprehensive test. I can count on one finger the number of times I ever needed to pick a lock on a pen test in 15 years. Under the door tools, 3 times, and 2 were at the same site, the same door, to just get back into it. And badge cloning, probably a handful of times. The replication is always the more important thing, if it looks real, right? But again, that is not to discount the importance of being able to do these things, which is, again, a point we'll revisit in a little bit, right? What I'm going through now is essentially everything pre-2019, right? This was all very common stuff pre-2019, and then we'll kind of get up to the incidents that sort of changed the landscape a little bit, right? Significant differences between the cyber side and the physical side, right? Cyber is very standardized, right? If you get a web app pen test, a basic web app pen test, external, internal, from any vendor that's out there, right? You should expect the same stuff, right? Now, there's going to be variations in quality and a specific approach and all of that, but if you're getting a PCI application test, it should look very much the same vendor to vendor, right? NIST drives a lot of this same type of stuff. There's also well-established approach methodologies. PTES, OWASP, MITRE, even things like the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, CVSS, right? There is no equivalent to those on the physical pen testing side, right? There's lots of rules and regulations as far as physical security goes and best practices. So the ANSI as-is standards up here, right? Really good and important to know as a physical pen tester, but this is not an approach to the offensive side of the house, right? Strongly recommend taking a look at ISACA's physical penetration testing, the most overlooked aspect of security. Great white paper from almost exactly a year ago, making a lot of the same points that I'm trying to make today. Really, really good read. Now, there's not a lot of guidance for this type of stuff. There are a lot of relevant rules, right? So, gun-free zones, a lot of American-specific problems. Check, is that better? All right. Okay. All right, so, yes, so they went to jail, right? Still, like, okay at this point, right? They had the letter, let's get in touch with the point of contacts, you know, it is what it is. Well, they were actually upcharged from trespassing to felony burglary, which is an even bigger problem. There is some question of how the actual client, the state, reacted. It was originally reported that at least one of those folks that was called in the middle of the night expressed no knowledge of the test or the testers, which is a problem. Now, I will say that in the most recent interview, both of them suggest that the client did actually, have a conversation. So, again, it's a little squishy there. What we do know is that one of the points of contact promised to show up in court the next morning, and they did not, which of course didn't help anybody. This very quickly became a political quagmire, and the testers were caught right in the middle, right? The general reactions from state officials, from county officials, spoke to a complete misunderstanding and a, dare I say, malicious misrepresentation of the assessment and the industry at large, right? The arraigning judge was extremely upset that they broke into her courthouse, right? Well, she left the door open, right? The county prosecutor was aware of the entire situation, but still pressed on and then upcharged them as well. A couple of state senators' reactions. You see, I'm gonna get worked up about this because this just makes me so angry. State senator, these hired hands waited until 12:30 a.m. on September 11th to conduct one of the break-ins. The state picks the date. Like, we don't get to pick the date. The state says, I want you to break into these courthouses on these dates, right? Another state senator whose daughter worked at the courthouse said she doesn't need to be shot by two guys with a bag of burglary tools. Like, they closed the door. Like, they're the ones who shut the door. Again, that's a complete misrepresentation of what was going on, right? I can't speak to the current state, but a month after this all went down, there was at least a bill put forward at the state that would prevent off-hours testing happening at courthouses moving forward, because that makes us more secure somehow, right? The charges were eventually dismissed, right? In January of 2020, on the final day before they had to go to trial. So they dragged their feet a lot, right? Miraculously, both Gary and Justin stayed in the industry. Gary's at Kaiju Security now. Justin Wynn stayed at Coalfire. He's a director there now. And then Tom McAndrew, who was and remains the CEO at Coalfire, really seems to went to bat for them. Coalfire was never a person in this whole situation, right? The county went after the testers individually, right? He could have just washed his hands and said, oh, sorry, but he bailed them out of jail, got them a legal team. It was a whole thing, right? So huge, major kudos to that particular gentleman. So at the time, as you can imagine, a lot of us in the industry got very introspective, right? There were at least a dozen situations where I thought to myself, man, that absolutely could have been me, right? A lot of consulting companies also looked at it and went, wow, that could have been us, right? And immediately got super risk averse. A lot of companies just immediately got out of the business of physical pen testing, which, again, it doesn't make anybody more secure, right? If anything, it makes it that much worse, right? So if that wasn't enough, we cut to the 1-2 punch of COVID-19. So 3 months after this all went down and was resolved, the world locked down, right? No travel, social distancing, and nobody was in the offices anyway, right? And that was more or less, and not a permanent, but a lengthy death knell for physical pen testing, right? Any testing that was going on was very limited to social engineering. Gone were the days of sending more than one person on site, right? You get one person for one day, go and try to walk up and see if you can talk your way in, right? And for the most part, attitudes have remained largely in that direction, right? We went from a very highly specialized service to, well, anybody can do this, right? Sales, client management, customers, even the testers have sort of backed away from this. Now again, it's not universal, and there's firms that do this, and we're starting to see a little bit of a return of the more complicated things. But the poorer quality of work has absolutely been allowed to persist, which is a problem, right? Everybody learned the entirely wrong lessons from these incidents. Right. So where does that leave us, right? Well, we should be expecting better as potential clients, and we should be better as consultants, right? And I'll admit, it is very easy to dismiss physical attacks when you're coming from the cyber side, right? You get answers like, well, we have cameras, right? Or, well, we sent an intern and they got in, so why do we need somebody with more experience than that, right? They're still getting in, what's the big deal, right? Or, then this one really gets me, well, the real threat actors aren't actually doing this, so we don't really need to test it. Right? That comes from the tester side a lot, right? The long and short of it is ignoring risk is never a good option, right? And physical security should be a very important part of any organization's threat model, right? It's a different aspect of the threat model, right? There's still chance for data theft. If I walk into a bank branch and just roll out a shred bin, like that's still PII loss, right? And we've done it, right? It's real. It's easier than it sounds, right? You may not get very far, but it's out of the building, right? But this is, what happens here is loss prevention, right? Reputational damage, and then of course the life and safety issue, right? We're not talking about stealing credit cards and identity theft. We're talking about life and death for some of this stuff, and that's why this stuff matters, right? If I go back here. So with the cameras, just to revisit these points, cameras are almost always forensic in nature. Cameras are almost never preventative, right? Maybe from a criminal's perspective, I'm going to break into somewhere that doesn't have cameras versus somewhere that does, but if I want to get in that target, I don't really care if it has cameras, right? A camera has never stopped me from getting into a facility, right? Maybe once. An anecdote I'll share in a minute. So the testers are still getting in. I would argue that if you're sending an intern and they get in and get the keys to the kingdom, what was missed, right? You wouldn't give a company a team that never does vulnerability scans. Right? Why would we do a physical pen test if the company's never done a threat assessment, a full physical risk assessment, right? Let's get our foundation under us before we try walking into the facility, right? And then the real threat actors aren't using it. Well, let's take a look at that. Right. So here's some examples. We've got diamond heist in Antwerp, Belgium several years ago. $100 million of diamonds stolen, never recovered. It was a gentleman with a crowbar in the safe deposit box room. Just had ingratiated himself over a couple of weeks to the bank, posed as a diamond dealer, and then just one day went in there with a crowbar and opened up a bunch of safe deposit boxes and walked out with all the diamonds. Now, he was eventually caught. The diamonds were never recovered. Procter & Gamble. This was 2014, so 10 years ago. Huge headquarters in Cincinnati, 2 towers. A group of activists walked into one of the buildings carrying a bunch of gear. They strung a line between the 2 buildings, which you see here, and put down an anti-animal testing banner amongst them. Huge reputational hit, right? Physical security. This was not like we're sneaking in after hours. They literally just walked into the facility and walked up to the whatever floor it was and then opened a window in a high-rise and did this, right? Huge problem. Stuxnet is, and I hate to use this example, but it's such a good example, right? Stuxnet and the destruction or the setback of the Iranian nuclear program was a thumb drive, right? They, the threat actors in that space, and do with that what you will, convinced somebody to plug in a thumb drive. That's physical security. Come on. More recently, in Cleveland, there was a whole series of ATM smash and grabs where people were just driving trucks up to ATMs and literally ripping them out of the ground, right? And just taking them home and doing them what they will. And then again, of course, the life and safety aspect, right? The active shooters, the active assailants, these are all why we do this type of work, right? So we went from, and over the span of a couple of years, having a whole list of things we're doing to getting super risk averse, saying, oh no, we can't do any of that anymore. And now we're left with this, right? Even tailgating, now it's, well, if you only have one person, you get one shot at tailgating, right? Badge replication. I have had several occasions in the last couple of years where they're like, ooh, that badge looks really close to ours. Do you think you could dumb it down a little bit? Like, no. Like, aren't I supposed to get inside? Right? People, hey, no jumping fences this time, because that's too easy. Like, well, did you put the barbed wire up that we recommended last time? Well, no, so we know it's there. So it's, again, it's problems, right? So, what could we be doing as testers, and what should you be looking for in a vendor that does this type of work, right? Well, from the beginning, collaboration is key, right? Scoping calls for this type of work need to be huge, right? We need to talk about the stakeholders. We need to talk about what the goals are and dig down in. If you don't know what your goals are, we need to take a step back and look at another service, right? If you don't know where your data is at or any of that, we're not ready for a physical pen test, right? Again, these should be goal-oriented, like red team exercises. Right? From the executor side, we need to think about the risk, right? Are there firearms on site? And not just that, who's carrying them? Are they armed guards? Are you in an open carry state? Are you in a conceal and carry state, a constitutional carry state? So who might be holding the firearms, right? Do you have an approach policy in place? Anyone familiar with that term? Yeah. So it's what can the guards even do, right? In a lot of cases, you'll have a guard force. They are forbidden to get engaged. Their only job is to look tough and call the police, right? That's really good to know. If I'm trying to break in and get caught, am I immediately going to have to be confronted by law enforcement, because that's the guard force's role, right? So is there an approach policy in place, right? And then who are the stakeholders? If we're breaking into a county courthouse, does the county need to be involved in the conversations, right? That's a question that everybody asks now, but wasn't so commonplace 5 years ago, right? Establishing the communication plan, the rules of engagement, things we've already talked about, hugely important, right? These meetings, coupled with remote reconnaissance, which also needs to be baked into these types of engagements, so the first time you see a building isn't the first time you see the building. This helps us to form pretext, so it's not just walking up to the facility and going, hey, can I come in there? No? Okay, and walking away. Like, we need the reason for all of that, and that involves some open source intelligence gathering and reconnaissance, right? Sticking with the theme of documentation, there we go. SALs and authorization letters. The wording needs to be tight enough where there's no wiggle room. Everybody needs to thoroughly understand it. After Coalfire, TrustedSec, another Cleveland-based firm, Dave Kennedy, I'm sure everybody's familiar with him, they did a wonderful thing and open sourced their documentation around physical pen testing, specifically the authorization letters and the SAL language. Really, 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 really useful. Obviously, you still want to have a lawyer look at anything you put out, because not a lawyer, but a really, really useful tool to be getting started, whether you're a tester or you're a potential client, right? We already talked about legal reviews. Blanket coverage for testers, right? Make sure that we've got, if your insurance policy is in place, that it not only covers cyber, but also testers getting arrested and all of that as well. The testers now really care about that, right? And again, it wasn't on our radar years and years ago, right? Trust factors. The communication agreement, right? If we want to make sure that our points of contact are going to answer that phone in the middle of the night, that they're not asleep and, oh, it'll wake me up. No, hey, I'm going to the site right now. We'll call you or you will get a call if we're going to, if we're picked up, right? There is some consideration now about actually reaching out to local law enforcement and giving them a heads up the testing is taking place. This is actually where I break a little bit with both Gary and Justin. And in their interview recently, they talked about, well, we do this now. We reach out to law enforcement and tell them. That's got to come from the client, right? If I'm going to break into a Walmart, I'm not going to call the police and go, hey, trust me, I'm breaking into the Walmart, but they said it's okay. Right? No. Walmart's got to reach out to the local law enforcement, tell them, hey, I've got this person coming, this is the description, they're going to be carrying a letter. So the one time the camera got me, actually, I'll share this anecdote. We were breaking into a series of gas plants on the East Coast, and there were 4. We got into 3 of them. The last one, it was a night breach. They had 3 perimeters, and this was the gas plants. If you've ever seen them, where they're the giant football field-sized containers of natural gas, right? Got through 2 of the perimeters, got under the fence of the last perimeter, and had missed one of the cameras because it was too far in. And they caught me as I was halfway under, and the guy who was with me was another perimeter back. But they caught us right as we got under. They rolled up, and guns drawn, right? Because this is a natural gas plant. And they said it was essentially like a thunder flash. Like there was a code word ahead of time that, like, okay, like we knew this was going to happen. And then I said, hey, I'm going to reach in my jacket and get my authorization letter. Then, is that okay? Reach out and grab it and do that. But it's because the communication took place ahead of time, right? Really, really, really important. So anyway, take that for what it's worth. Right. Remote reconnaissance. So this is imagery intelligence, this is OSINT, this is anything you could possibly think of, right? It's very important that this time gets baked into these types of assessments, right? So this is Google Street or Google View of where we're at right now. And I can't tell you, coming from the Intel community and watching the military spend 25 grand on an ArcGIS license, now 20 years ago, to think that it's all just free and out there and in higher resolution is just wild, right? There's a lot you can do from an operational planning perspective with Google imagery. Google Earth does actual historical data. So as you're looking at a map, you can go, okay, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, was this gate open? Chances are when you get there, the gate's going to be open, right? So you build up those data points. Badge replication using OSINT. So a lot of places will say, flip your badge over if you're going to take a picture, right? The worst possible thing you can do, right? We're always going to find the front-facing piece of the badge, whether it's, hey, it's my first day of work, hey, I'm retiring, or somebody just taking a picture and not remembering to take their badge off, right? You're always going to find the front. You want to find the back, because what's the first thing a security guard is going to do when they catch you and go, hey, give me your badge? They're going to check the back, right? They're going to look at the back, right? Even if it's just a mag strip, and we can just print black ink to make it look like it, it's just a quick look, right? But it adds a little bit of legitimacy. But it's those types of things we're looking for when we're doing the initial check online, right? It helps you build pretexts, right? Hey, we're putting in a new parking lot and there's going to be construction. It's posted all over Twitter. I'm showing up in a hard hat and an orange vest, and I'm going to try to use that to get in. Hey, I got to use the bathroom. Do you mind if I come in here, right? That stuff matters, right? When you get on site, using some of this stuff like radio reconnaissance, badge cloning, even something as simple as looking the part. Yes, sir. I'm going to show you that in just a second. I got a site I'll pull up. Yep. Looking the part. If the target you're going to is a major employer for the area, go to thrift stores. Try to find branded clothing, branded clipboards, right? The more you look the part, right, the easier it is to blend in. Let me briefly just talk here about some of this remote reconnaissance stuff. So this is a hypothetical factory that we hypothetically broke into several years back. So we did our due diligence, found, hey, there's a train yard, and this is where we think, and if we were to zoom in, you would see, we're pretty sure there's a door here.
You got a laser pointer on that.
Oh, really? Is it? Boom. Right up here? All right, so we are reasonably certain there's a door there, right? The other piece is there's this huge perimeter fence that goes all around the facility. There's a gap right here where the train tracks come in. No gate, it's just the trains have to come through, right? We said, okay, well, that's really far from the door. So what we did was, if we were to zoom out, the tracks come in from up here and then circle around. So there were 3 of us. We sent the junior guy the 2 miles along the train track and said, hey, just go and see if there's a door there. And when he confirmed, then we followed and came back around. Right? Well, there were also trains in the yard in every single photo that we found in the historical map data. So this is me taking a picture from under the train in the rain at 2 o'clock in the morning, where we had confirmed that the door we were targeting was not being badged. There were a couple people that were like doing this, but we counted more people not doing that than people that were doing that. We waited for the guard who was in a truck circling the grounds every 25 minutes, give or take 30 seconds. So we sat there for a few hours and said, okay, let's do it. And I changed out of the black gear into jeans, boots, hard hat, carried an orange vest, walked through, and then just walked in. And then came out after about an hour, and then the other 2 went in and did the same thing. Again, just timing it. But we would have wasted so much more time if we hadn't have taken the time ahead of time to go and look and say, hey, there's where we're getting in. Look at all this data, or look at all these openings in the fence, and it all came down to that. So that initial reconnaissance was hugely important to the success of the mission there. To revisit the radio question, radioreference.com is a site intended for use for people who are into scanners and open radio and all of that. Where it's useful, if you buy a $150 scanner on Amazon, you can go and look. Like if I search for Cleveland, here's open frequencies in the Cleveland area. Now a lot of it's government, right? But there are businesses, right? And if they're not encrypting their radios, one, it's something you can share with them as a potential finding and say, hey, we didn't use it, but you're using unencrypted radios that you can confirm when you get on site. But if you want to track guard movements, if you want to look into their security practices and get banter, if you want to inject and impersonate, if that's something that is in scope, right? This is where this type of stuff can happen, right? And it's just open source. It's just out there. Where badge cloning is concerned, it sort of existed in this mercurial space for a long, long time. It's way easier nowadays, right? Especially things like Proxmox or MyFair, like those are just broken protocols, but they're still widely in use. But even like the HID, oh man, what is it? The it's not the most recent. No, I can't think of the actual protocol. But even the like not quite most recent HID, which are on the higher end, those are broken too, and can be taken advantage of. Now, as I already mentioned, it's very unlikely that you'll need that, but it's important to be able to speak to it, to be able to have the capability. Right? Tailgating is not just following somebody in the door and hoping for the best, right? There's an actual, maybe an art, I won't call it a science, but there's an art to tailgating as well. Double tailgating is shoving two people through at the same time behind somebody and hoping for the best. A false tailgate is one of my favorites. I walk in without a badge through, ideally, an infrared turnstile like this, where you walk through, you have to badge, and then it goes off. So I walk through, set it off, and go, crap, I forgot my badge. I'll be right back. Meanwhile, my partner, who also does not have a cloned badge, but a replicated badge, puts it on, walks through, the thing's still going off, I'm the distraction, says, hey, I've got my badge, I gotta get to work, right, and goes through. The most exciting time we ever used this is where the alarm actually didn't go off, and both of us got through, and it turned out they had been in place for a year, and nobody had actually ever turned them on. True story, true story. Research lab, we literally got to something called Project X in one of the labs. But again, how long would that have persisted without a pen test, without actually checking to see if it was working, right? People, processes, and technology. And for that reason, never just use a single tester, right? One and done is bad, right? If I had been the only tester there and happened to have gotten caught, none of that follow-on would have happened, right? And everything would have been like, well, I guess you're okay. Not great. What you can also do with multiple testers is supplementing the physical security with phishing and vishing, right? This works very frequently with things like branch locations, where it's, the building might be even smaller than this room. Everybody knows each other. I'm not walking in and just getting around, right? It's not safe for anybody. But if we dress up like contractors or like members of the IT staff, we use open source intel to find the front desk person or the manager of the branch and say, hey, spoof an email, hey, I'm so-and-so from IT, we're sending out people to go check all your stations, let them in and do what they need to do, we're looking to get you some upgrades, we'll be out of there, right? Or a phone call is even more effective, and you show up half an hour later with branded business cards, they authenticate you with that, right? It doesn't mean anything. We even use our own names for that, because you just show your license, right? Like, oh, well, he's got a license, and it matches his business card, so he must be real, right? But thinking through that, it makes a difference, right? It's all kind of stacked fake authentication. Right? So for testers, remember that you're paid to be the bad guy, right? Which means we need to be thinking outside the box. We need to be creative. I mentioned at the beginning things like creative entry. It's really just pulling on doors, but the doors might not all be on the ground. So the example I would call attention to here is started with more remote reconnaissance. So Google Maps, if you have any background in contracting or construction or anything like that, know that a flat roof has pathways for OSHA standards. Depending on the location, whether it's local ordinance, OSHA standards, or just negligence, a lot of these doors are just left unlocked and open, right? If you get stuck on the roof, right, you need to have some way to get down. So the regulation makes sense. But knowing that, we went in to another manufacturing facility, and I tailgated into the floor, got around, did our thing, primary objective complete. The secondary objective was the office space. So my partner got into the main area, tried to tailgate into the office space and got caught. Did not have to turn over his letter, managed to extricate himself. He was impersonating somebody from corporate. And so like, well, I'll come back tomorrow and we'll get this sorted out. And they let him go. And then we're getting into that office space. Like, it doesn't end there. So we kind of sussed out, like, okay, well, this door, and I bet him dinner, like, I'll bet you dinner that this door is open, and then it leads into the office space. So we managed to shimmy up the building on an exposed I-beam, found our way to the door, and sure enough, that's him getting down in. It dropped him right into the kitchen area, and then we took some selfies at the point of contact's desk and went on from there. So, but this is where it does, in the moment, feel like, oh, it's James Bond. All I did was open a door. There was nothing super cool or technical here. I just knew that there was a door on the top of the building that was probably open, right? And that's where some of this stuff needs to be grounded, because it was a really easy fix, right? They made the I-beams less easy to shimmy up, and then they put in a particular lock on it that they could then open when they needed to. So anyway, it was a good fix, right? The last part is to make sure that you're safe. Now, I will say that this was fun. I wouldn't do it again. Right? We were 2 stories up, shimmying up an I-beam. It wasn't the safe decision, right? We should have thought about that. And there are ways, things that can be done now to get around that. So stick to the scope, do the right thing, and everyone would be better, right? Tools. Speaking of being creative, I have used a tactical ladder, which is a thing that you can buy on Amazon. I've used that way more frequently than a lockpick, than an under-the-door tool, anything like that. A lot of the times, once you get past the perimeter fence, which may or may not have barbed wire on it, it's gooey center, right? You can get around. So we put the tactical ladder up against the fence, climb up, climb down the backside, do your thing, then get out, climb back up the fence and down the tactical ladder. It's a great tool and worth the $200 investment or something like that. Want to go even more simple? Box of donuts. Hey, it's National Donut Day. Walk in with a giant stack of donuts and go, hey, these are for everybody. No one's going to stop you. They'll let you in. They'll let you in. They might take some of your donuts, but they'll let you in, right? All right. In terms of the training and resources that are out there, again, a lot of this is not super well established and standardized. Some of this is adjacent to offensive security. The social engineering pen testing professional, a little controversial, and I won't get into that, but if you research the cert and the folks behind it, there's a bit of a controversy. It's worthwhile. It's not just physical social engineering. It's email, it's phone as well. It is one of the only certifications that's really relevant to this space. So that's out there. I've been to several as-is classes over the years. That's the American Society for Industrial Security. I've never had a bad experience. They usually have them in really cool places like French Quarter in New Orleans and places like that. But it's active shooter response, it's physical threat assessment, it's investigative interviewing methods, insider threat programs, adjacent to everything we talked about today. Important as someone in the industry and working in this space, you want to be able to speak to the folks that are taking those classes, right, as a tester. So it's good things to have. Block sport, not as relevant as it might be, but that's at the heart and soul of this type of services, right? If you're working in this space, everybody expects you to be able to do some lock picking, right? Build a door. Go to Home Depot, buy an off-the-shelf door, put some supports on it, and then throw on a deadbolt, a hotel latch, and all those, and just practice. It's a really, really good way to go about that. There are one-off trainings for physical pen testing that are out there. Your mileage may vary. They tend to be outrageously expensive, and I've never taken them because they're outrageously expensive, but they exist. Lots of YouTube channels. Deviant Olaf, spelled Olam but pronounced Olaf. He is a self-described covert entry specialist. The channel is absolutely worth watching if you're interested in this space. And then there's things like OSINTframework.com. Again, adjacent to the physical side, but it's a huge mind map of any kind of OSINT you ever wanted to get into. A great space for that. In terms of useful experience, so if you're interested in this, and oh, I have that background, things as simple as like military science. Any ROTC kids in the room by chance? Anyone that did ROTC in college or anything like that? No, I took some of the classes, but I ended up enlisting. But the map reading, the route planning skills, hugely relevant to this space. Unfortunately, that type of stuff is gate kept by a lot of those programs, but if you are familiar with it or want to dig into those topics, that's where you can look. Any sort of intelligence experience, whether it's SIGINT, OSINT, IMINT, HUMINT, all of that is relevant here. General contracting and construction experience, I already mentioned. I grew up in a family of contractors, so looking for like, oh, this is not up to code, or hey, because of code, this is going to be open here. Really, really useful. And then getting experience with physical site assessments. So doing the walkthroughs, right? And this is, people don't always like to do these, right, because it's not cool, right? But it gets you background in understanding what to look for. And from a purchaser perspective, I strongly recommend looking for offensive security firms that do this type of work, because we're coming to the table with, this is how I would break in. It's not about how many cameras are in place, where they're facing, and all of that. We can do that type of stuff, but it's, well, if I'm going to break in, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm coming in through the roof, right? That type of stuff. You'll get a completely different perspective from folks with that particular type of background. And for folks interested in it, it's a lot easier to get involved in that type of work because there's more of it. It's more useful, it's more popular. I actually do a lot of pro bono work for school systems in the Cleveland area. Ohio does a bunch of safety and security grants, and so I'll go and do these types of assessments so they can apply and get their grants that way. So it's easy enough to get into that type of work. All right, so to bring things to a close here, as we've discovered over the last 5 years, the whole landscape of the physical pen testing space has changed significantly. It's no longer the Wild West, and that's not terrible, right? There's still a very significant lack of training standards and guidelines. There's no real defined path to go from zero to hero as far as execution of these services go, but there is significantly better awareness around the risks and the planning and the interactions, which is a good thing, right? So if you're a consultant, if you're interested in this space, make sure you're thinking outside the box, but not outside of scope, right? We want to prove the value of this type of work, and so putting our best foot forward is really important. We always want to make sure the scope is defined explicitly in written format, no handshake agreements here, right? We want to be a real first choice advisor when it comes to security work, and specifically this, right? We want the client coming to us and saying, yes, I trust you, right? And so all of that builds to it. If you're on the client side, always expect more out of your testers, but understand that that comes with a price, right? The work is more expensive. The more people we add, the more scope we add, right? But do consider going all in, right? Keeping things focused on a specific area of scope. Thank you so much for your time. I am always thrilled to talk about this, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Got a mic for questions if you need it. Let's thank the speaker first, of course.
Thank you.
If you have a good question and you've stayed to the end, he does have the corn code that you can use to get points in the game. The other thing I'll remind you of is the capture the flag is going now. Ends around 4-ish. You can go onto the corncon.net site and get the QR code and play if you want to do that. Questions?
Okay. With the rise of remote work as we're seeing in all industries, is physical pen testing starting to also incorporate that? I mean, you see the employees, how they're working, what they're accessing. Could remote work also is remote work a vulnerability that organizations need to consider for pen testing, physical pen testing, I should say?
That's a great question. So I have two answers for you. The first is we've seen an increase in requests for data center physical pen tests since the pandemic and the rise of remote work and all that. On the executive side, we've actually seen a rise in physical security work around their actual residencies and going and trying to develop like target packages for executives. So most recently, we did a series for a very large healthcare network, and one of the most impactful findings was a particular executive whose son, I won't say was a celebrity, but had a minor following on social media, was still in high school, which that's a whole other talk. But we were able to find that he was on the football team. We knew his license plate, his car, and his likely path home. We had the game schedules and all of that, and we said, hey, if I'm a threat actor and I care physically about doing something to you, we're going to kidnap your son. Here's on the route where he's got to stop, make a 90-degree turn in the wooded area. Like, this is where we're going to do it. And so, but we also then went into his house and came up with a whole security program for his compound, because it wasn't just a house, it was a compound. And it was very impactful, right? He came out of it more concerned, and thankfully the son, who again was the point of breach for this, and again, it was hypothetical. Obviously, we didn't kidnap anybody. It was all on paper, but we have been seeing more. That's not something we're going to do for, Ken Smith working out of his basement, right? But for the folks that are high value, high net worth, managing these companies, there's much more interest at that level for those particular types of services. Yeah, great question.
Is there a specific sector in as far as like critical infrastructure that seems to be the worst when it comes to physical security?
Yes. Hospitals and manufacturing, hands down. Yeah. There's part of it is just because their footprints are huge, so there's lots of doors. Part of it is that there's a lot of people, so it's easier to blend in. There's a lot of temp work, and so you can just say, I'm a temp worker, I'm from corporate. If I say I'm from corporate, they're not going to know. So yeah, hospitals and manufacturing, 100%.
Is there any one recommendation
Mandatory badges for employees, and just, again, it's bypassable, but at least it's a visual cue. It's something that comes up honestly in school systems as well, and making sure that school folks and teachers and faculty and staff are all wearing it. Just having a visual cue, it promotes a little more culture of security, not paranoia, that's our realm, but more of a, oh, hey, I don't recognize you, I don't have a badge. Where's your badge, right? Just having that makes a huge
Totally.
difference.
Motorola badge showing was sufficiently a high priority that the CEO said, if you see me walking without a badge, you stop me and call security.
100%.
What recommendations would you give for a small company trying to get into this physical pen testing?
So to get into it, as in to execute?
Service provider.
Yeah.
To break into this.
Yeah, I would say training is one. Again, adjacent to it, but being very comfortable talking to. So the folks that tend to manage these programs are, again, ex-law enforcement, ex-military, facilities management. Right, physical security tends to exist completely outside the scope of what we would call the CISO type space, and so just being comfortable communicating to those types of things. They're going to know the ANSI standards, they're going to know the as-is standards, they're going to have attended those types of trainings, so getting to those is huge. And then just bringing somebody in to kind of jumpstart that program is a big thing. It's not something that you're going to be able to develop, and I'm no judgment passed right here, but it's very unlikely that you'll be able to develop that from the ground, because there's a lot of unknowns, and there is, as hopefully we just saw, there's a lot of risk not worth taking on without having the proven expertise coming in the door. Yeah, great question.